Use it for all lawful purposes. That sentence sits on the table in front of you. By Friday, you have to decide whether Claude becomes a military tool with almost no meaningful red line left, or whether you tell the Pentagon no and risk blowing up a relationship worth up to $200 million. You are not an anti-war protester. That would make this easy. You are Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic. You have already helped bring frontier AI into classified US systems. In November 2024, you partner with Palantir and AWS to make Claude available to intelligence and defense agencies, including highly sensitive environments like IL-6. By April 2025, government customers using Palantir Fed Start can also reach Claude through Google Cloud. By July 14, 2025, the Department of Defense, through the CDAO, gives your company a 2-year prototype agreement with a ceiling of $200 million. Anthropic says Claude is already integrated into defense workflows on classified networks. Your custom Claude Gov models are already in use across the national security community. So when this showdown arrives, the truth is much messier than it looks. You didn't spend the last year trying to keep AI out of the war room. You spent the last year helping it get in. Now you are staring at the moment that matters more than entry: who controls it once it's inside. That is the trap, because the Pentagon is not asking whether Claude can help with logistics, intelligence analysis, planning, or the 1,000 other things modern militaries do. By your own later telling, Anthropic agrees with roughly 98% to 99% of the military's desired use cases. Wait, what? Yes. This entire fight is over the last 1% or 2%, but that last 1% is where democracies can turn into something else. The demand sounds narrow and reasonable. All lawful purposes. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell says the military has no interest in mass surveillance of Americans or autonomous weapons without human involvement. If that is true, why not sign? Because you think the word lawful is doing too much work. Because you have spent months thinking about what frontier AI changes, not in theory, in scale, in speed, in practical force. In January 2026, just weeks before this collision, you publish an essay called The Adolescence of Technology. In it, you argue something that surprises almost everyone. Democracies, you write, must use AI to defend themselves. This is not optional. There is, in your words, an existential importance to using AI to defend the United States and other democracies against autocratic adversaries. So no, your position is not pacifism. Your position is more dangerous. You are saying yes to power, but not unlimited power. And the Pentagon hates that distinction. Because your two red lines are the two things the government does not want a private AI company vetoing. First, no domestic mass surveillance of Americans. Second, no fully autonomous weapons or military targeting without human involvement. That's it, 2 lines. And according to reporting from AP and The Washington Post, those are the lines you refuse to erase when Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth meets with you and gives you a deadline: agree by Friday or risk losing the contract. Officials also reportedly warn that Anthropic could be labeled a supply chain risk. They even float the Defense Production Act, a phrase that lands with the weight of federal command. Not negotiation, command, cordial meeting, coercive substance. That is what makes this story so unnerving. From the outside, it looks like a policy disagreement. Inside the room, it feels more like this. The state is telling you that if your model is strategically valuable, then your conditions are starting to look like disobedience. And maybe the most unnerving part is this. You understand their argument. China is moving fast, warfare is accelerating, decision cycles are shrinking. The Pentagon is looking at hypersonic missiles, AI-enabled battlefields, and the lessons of Ukraine and Gaza. The US Air Force has already tested an AI-piloted jet. People inside the system believe delay itself is a risk. You don't dismiss any of that. In fact, you've built Anthropic's posture around the idea that democratic states cannot afford to lose the AI race. In August 2025, you even formalized that posture with a National Security and Public Sector Advisory Council filled with former officials from DoD, Intelligence, DOJ, DOE, and Congress. Anthropic's own language says deep public sector engagement is essential. So when you resist now, you cannot claim innocence. That is exactly why the decision hurts. You are not asking, should America defend itself? You are asking something much worse. How do you arm a democracy without helping it become more like the thing it fears? That question isn't abstract to you. In your essay, you describe domestic mass surveillance as a bright red line. You warn that AI can create a real panopticon. Not because the government suddenly gains magical new authorities, but because frontier models confuse oceans of commercially available and publicly available data into something previous systems could not. Movement records, browsing trails, associations, fragments that one by one look harmless. But AI does not look at them one by one. AI stitches, it correlates, it infers. It can take 1,000,000 weak signals and turn them into a map of a person's life. That is your fear. Not just that the government might listen, that the government might finally be able to understand everything it hears. And the second red line is no less chilling. Fully autonomous weapons, not partially autonomous systems already used in modern warfare. You have acknowledged those can matter, even save democratic societies under attack. Your objection is narrower. Current frontier AI, you argue, is simply not reliable enough to sit in the kill chain without human involvement. Not reliable enough for life and death judgment. Not reliable enough to distinguish civilian from combatant at machine speed under battlefield ambiguity. Not reliable enough to trust with warfighters' lives either. So when the Pentagon asks for broader access, you hear two different futures hidden inside one sanitized phrase: all lawful purposes. One future is software helping a democracy defend itself. The other is software helping a democracy outgrow its own restraints. And you think some of those restraints are already eroding. That line from your essay may be the most revealing thing you ever wrote. Democratic safeguards, you warn, are already gradually eroding in some democracies. AI could accelerate that erosion because it reduces the number of people required to operate systems of surveillance and force. Fewer fingers on the button, less friction, less dissent inside the machine. That matters because democracies often protect themselves through slowness. Warrants, committees, human review, bureaucratic drag, the need to get a lot of people to agree before the state can act at scale. AI attacks that friction, and suddenly the thing that makes a democracy feel inefficient starts to look like the last thing keeping it free. By late February 2026, the showdown turns public. Reporting reveals that Anthropic is the last major frontier lab still refusing to supply its model to a new US military internal network under these terms. Google, OpenAI, xAI. Others are already in the game, with contracts reportedly worth up to $200 million each. So now another pressure closes around you. You are not just facing the Pentagon. You are facing the possibility that the entire industry has already decided your red lines are optional. That isolation matters. It changes the psychology of the room. If everyone else says yes, then your no stops looking principled and starts looking obstructive. Maybe ideological. Hegseth has already said military AI should operate without ideological constraints that limit lawful military applications. He says the Pentagon's AI will not be woke. There it is. Wait, what? The argument is no longer just about safety or governance. It is being reframed as culture war, as if refusing domestic mass surveillance and human-free kill decisions is not a systems design concern, but a political affectation. You can probably feel the ground shifting under the whole industry in that moment. Because once safeguards are mocked as ideology, the only remaining standard is utility. Can it do the job? Is it lawful? Why are you in the way? So you answer publicly on February 26, 2026. Anthropic, you say, cannot in good conscience accede. Not cannot legally, not cannot technically, cannot in good conscience. The phrase matters because it reveals what this really is. Not a fight over procurement language, but over moral authority. Who gets to define the acceptable use of frontier AI when national security is invoked? The state or the builder? And your statement does something else smart. It refuses the easiest attack. You do not posture as anti-military. You open by reaffirming the existential importance of using AI to defend the United States and other democracies. You remind everyone that Anthropic was proactive. First frontier AI company on classified networks. First at the national labs. First to provide custom models for national security customers. You even make the patriotic cost legible. You say Anthropic gave up several $100 million in revenue by cutting off access to companies linked to the Chinese Communist Party, including firms the Pentagon itself designated as Chinese military companies. In other words, don't question my loyalty. We already paid for it. That is the twist at the heart of this story. You are not refusing because you do not care about national security. You are refusing because you think this is national security. You think a democracy that builds a domestic AI panopticon or hands lethal decisions to unreliable autonomous systems is not merely defending itself, it is changing itself, and maybe never changing back. The Pentagon, of course, can answer with its own logic. If these uses are lawful, why should a private CEO overrule elected government? If the military says it does not intend to use Claude for mass surveillance or human-free weapons, why not trust the chain of command? If rivals are willing to comply, aren't you just weakening American capacity while preserving your own moral comfort? Those are not stupid questions. That's what makes this such a hard story. Because from your chair, every option looks like a failure of some kind. Say yes, and maybe you keep influence, revenue, access, and the ability to shape future deployments from the inside. Maybe if you walk away, someone less cautious just replaces you. Say no, and you could lose the contract. Lose standing, lose strategic relevance. Be branded a supply chain risk. Be squeezed by the very government you say you are trying to help defend. AP reports you even point out the contradiction. How can Anthropic be both a national security threat and so essential that extraordinary pressure must be applied to keep its model in military hands? That line lands because it exposes something ugly. Once your AI becomes important enough, your refusal is treated not as governance, but as interference. And that may be the deepest lesson here. The real red line was never just surveillance or autonomy. It was control. You already let Claude into classified systems, into defense workflows, into the state's nervous system. But strategic adoption changes the balance of power. The more useful your model becomes, the harder it is to insist on conditions. Success itself becomes leverage against the builder. That is the nightmare. Not whether AI enters war, whether anyone still gets to say no after it does. And when people look back on this fight, they may miss how narrow it was. Not a sweeping rejection, not a pacifist revolt. By your account, Anthropic was aligned with almost everything the military wanted: logistics, analysis, support, defense. The dispute was over two exclusions that up to that point had not even blocked adoption, which raises the most uncomfortable question of all. If those red lines were not preventing the military from using Claude, why force them out? Why insist on all lawful purposes unless the real issue is future freedom of action? That is the open loop sitting beneath the whole confrontation. Maybe this was about immediate capability. Maybe it was about principle. Or maybe it was about making sure no private company retains veto power over what a strategic model can become once the national security state decides it matters. If that is true, then your Friday deadline is bigger than one contract. It is an early warning for the entire frontier AI industry. Because every lab wants to believe it can partner with the state and still keep its conscience in the contract. But your standoff suggests a harsher reality. At first, governments want access. Later, they want discretion. And eventually, they may want obedience. So the story of Dario Amodei versus the Pentagon is not the story of a founder who tried to keep AI out of war. He didn't. He helped bring it in. The story is what happens when the safest founder in frontier AI discovers that once the state treats your model as strategic infrastructure, your safeguards stop looking like safeguards. They start looking like obstacles. And then the question stops being whether your AI can serve the country. The question becomes whether serving the country still includes the right to refuse what the country asks next.